my people, how you doing? Hope you're having a fantastic damn day. Welcome back to the channel. As you can see, I'm in my familiar surroundings. I'm home from vacation. It was an absolute blast these last 2 or so weeks. But now the grind is back. 2024, I know I have released a few videos since, but 2024 is about to get underway officially. So we'll be starting off with a cracker, Michael Carrick's 4-2-3-1 system with, of course, Middlesbrough. Of course, I've also gone ahead and done a little bit of research, and I've more or less tried to replicate their attacking shape and their style of football when they are feeling a bit more confident, when they know that they can attack the opposition, and when they have a lot of possession of the ball. So they will look to try and take up a 3-1-2-3-1 system type, say, with the likes of Jones and Engel working the ball out wide into them and them firing crosses and attacking the opposition in their box and making sure that a lot of the offense is channeled to those wider areas, stretching the opposition. So anyway, I will get into that, how you can replicate this system as well, so stay tuned for that. But for the meantime, if you are new to the channel, we make plenty of tactics and I do deep dives into how you can replicate those. So again, if you are new to the channel, please hit the subscribe button, and if you aren't new and you're just here for the good old regular me, please hit that like button. It helps the channel a lot. Of course, these last 2 weeks I haven't been uploading as frequently. I've been doing a fair amount of uploading, but not enough. So we're trying to get the algorithm back to liking me. So if you guys can, please hit that like button down below. And yeah, subscribe if you're new. Let's hop on straight into the video. Okay, so starting off with the formation, I've made no real changes to it. It's a 4-2-3-1 wide. It's 1 goalkeeper, 2 centre-backs, 2 full-backs, 2 DMs, 1 attacking midfielder, 2 wider midfielders, and then of course 1 striker. Now with the tactics going forward, like I mentioned earlier, for their attacking offensive outlets and that formation, they try and work the ball out into those wide areas of the pitch with the likes of Engel or Isaiah Jones, and then they try and fire in crosses or cutbacks or try to attack from those wider areas. So I think the tactical vision that best suits this team and allows you to incorporate all the aspects of a Michael Carrick system, I think the tactical vision should be set to wing play. Now that's just my opinion. You guys can let me know down below if you think maybe the gegenpressing does more or less replicates a better system. You guys are going to let me know down below, but for me personally, I think wing play best gets the best out of this Middlesbrough side. As for the defensive style and the pressing after possession loss, that's what they're trying to do, very aggressive with it. You will see with the player instructions as well, we've got a few players set to aggressive, so they will be hard in the tackle. They will look to try and press the opposition's backline high up the field, winning that ball back, looking to try and transition quickly into the counter-attacking system that Michael Carrick has set up very effectively, and more or less the defensive style needs to be very aggressive. So therefore, pressing after possession loss is essential. As for the team width, of course, it's set to 55. A nice, happy medium, balanced, does allow you to get those plays into those wide areas to try and prevent those crosses, but at the same time, you will sometimes look to just clog the passing lanes in the central areas of the field a bit more. But again, it's a balanced approach, so sometimes you might get the best of or be bested in those wider areas. Other times, you might out-duel your opponents. As for the team depth, it is set to 75, which is considered, by me, a bit of a high to mid-block line. Of course, when you are very positive and dominating the opposition, you want to try and pin them back. And of course, with the offensive system that I'll eventually show you, you'll see that the depth does increase a hell of a lot. I will say this though, Carrick, he's not opposed to not being pragmatic. He's not like the type of manager that's going to say, this is my system, we're going to play it no matter what. We saw the other day when they beat Chelsea 1-0, they were quite happy to defend in a mid-block or even a low block at times, making sure that it was 2 banks of 4, making sure that it was very hard for Chelsea to try and work their way in and around the opposition. In fact, they played a back 5 or a back 3 system. It was a shifting system at times. And again, you can appreciate that sometimes a manager knows, I'm a bit out of my depth there, so let's try and resort to the fundamentals. Let's try and make sure that we're hard to break down, and then we can look to try and counter. That's more or less what they did against the likes of Chelsea. So even though I'm playing a high line, or Michael Carrick will be playing a high line or a mid-block most times, he is not opposed to having that line drop fairly deep and make sure that they are counter-attacking more times than not. As for the offense, the build-up play is set to balance. Now, of course, they do tend to play those quick interchanging passes and the pass and move and trying to get those plays in behind. But again, you want the ability to have your centre-backs playing the ball from back to front really quickly as well. So you want that long ball approach, which is why balance best gets the best opportunities out of the side. So whether the likes of Isaiah Jones is making that run in behind, or maybe one of your strikers, they've made that run in behind, you want one of your centre backs to be able to pick up the ball, have that ball playing ability, and then play it out to the or into the space behind the opposition's defense. So trying to exploit them more times than not, or potentially having the ability to play those quick, fast, interchanging passes in the midfield, and then trying to obviously work it into your wider channels. As for the chance creation, I've gone with direct passing. Now this will encourage your forwards to consistently make those runs in behind, trying to exploit the high line of the opposition, or potentially the gaps between the opposition defenders to try and obviously get the most out of your offense. As for the width, I've gone with it set to 60 now. Obviously with wing play, you need to have a bit more width in your side, so 60 is the lowest you can go, and they do tend to try and shrink the central areas of the field and open up a lot more space for either the fullback or the winger to try and exploit down either flank. And more or less 60 does get the best out of that. As for players in the box though, now against Chelsea again, they did resort back to a bit more of a pragmatic approach, so it was not that many players in and around the box. But I will say this, on a normal occasion when they are playing in the championship against teams that are more or less on their level, they are quite happy to try and commit as many bodies forward, get them into the box, and trying to get as many players in and around that attacking third to try and land on that cross or that cutback opportunity and trying to score the important goal. As for corners and free kicks, as per always on the channel, I have set it to 4. At the back with the instructions for the goalkeeper, Jang, he is set to come for crosses and be a sweepy keeper. Now, of course, Michael Carrick's system, it's a very progressive, modern day system where you need your goalkeeper to be able to play out from the back, play under pressure, pass it out quite effectively into your midfield, or maybe even your forward line at times. Of course, having the ability to take up almost a secondary centre-back role in certain moments, having the ability to pass out from the back is very, very important. So he is set to be a sweeper keeper. Of course, it goes without saying, making sure he can make those saves in no man's land, making sure he can run off of his line and claim the ball and recycle it back into possession. And then, of course, you want him to be very aggressive with it. Of course, when he was at QPR, he was also very good at making sure he's claiming those crosses in the air. And because your width is set to 55, you do want to have a bit more of an aggressive goalkeeper, and more or less, Jang does do a very effective job with it, because not all the time will you be able to match your opponent with trying to prevent those crosses being fired into the box. So you need your keeper to be confident and claim those aerial balls, alleviating the stress and the pressure on your defenders. Anyway, moving on to your defenders, we've got Fry and McNair. They are set to their base set of instructions, no real changes to them, and now the first major changes happen in the side. So what I did note with Michael Carrick's system was they kind of shift to a back three, which is essentially the offensive system that we're going to go with, but this is more of like a toned down version of it. So if you're not overly confident with your opposition, you just stick to the balanced approach, and then the more your confidence grows in the game and you see the confidence of your players building, that's when you more or less shift to the offensive structure. But anyway, talking about the offense, Engel, he is going to be the more offensive fullback of the two. So he is going to be told to join the attack, of course, constantly making those runs down the left-hand side, and of course the run type will be set to overlap. Interception set to normal, no real changes to that, and then of course the defensive position is set to stick to position. As for your right back, now of course it can be Dick Steele or Tommy Smith. They do get forward a fair amount, yes, but they don't get forward nearly as much as what the left-hand side does. So more or less what you want is him to stay back while attacking, and if you do need him to progress the ball forward, that will be your job to collect the ball with him, make sure that you're interchanging those 1-2 passes, making sure that he is making that run down the line and supporting the attacking play from that right hand side. And more so, they do provide those deeper crosses, those early crosses into the box for the forward line if need be, so you can also look to try and launch a few balls from the right hand side into the box. Normal interceptions though, they are set to be on for him. And the run type, now I've set it to mix. Now because he is going to be staying back, you don't really want him staying back and hanging too wide. You want him to sometimes just tuck in and almost invert into a secondary or a third centre back at times, which is what Dick Steele as well as Tommy Smith are very capable of doing. And then for the defensive positioning, just like with the left-hand side, it is set to stick to position. Now moving on into your midfield, we've got the double pivot of Hackney and Howson. Now, of course, Hackney played slightly more advanced against the likes of Chelsea. Now, I do know that Middlesbrough have a very crazy injury crisis at the moment. It's like 14 to 16 players are out with injuries. So he has been used in a more attacking role, although naturally he is more of a DM. He's more of the holding midfielder. So we'll start off with his instructions going forward. So first off, the defensive behavior is set to cut passing lanes. He's going to look to try and be a bit more zonal, making sure he's in the way of anything that the opposition tries to build up in that central area of the pitch. The attacking support is set to stay back while attacking. So this double pivot won't really move too much. Very similar to what Scott McTominay and Fred did for Manchester United. They would stay in front of the back four or the back two at times and make sure that anything that the opposition tried to throw at them, whether it was a counter-attack or any quick interchanging build-up play, they were there to try and stop it and intercept and break up as much play as possible, which is more or less what Michael Carrick has tried to implement here at Middlesbrough. The interceptions is set to aggressive that almost replicates the work rate of this double pivot at times. Then the positioning freedom is set to stick to position and then cover the center for the defensive positioning, more or less making sure he's not drifting wide into those wider areas, opening up space in front of the back line, and more so trying to just to shield that area as much as possible. As for the likes of Howson, now he's got a very balanced box-to-box type role. So he will be told to have a balanced defensive support for the defensive behavior. So sometimes having the zonal approach, just like with Hackney, or other times looking to be a bit more tight man marking, make sure that they are trying to mark the opponent or track one particular opponent out of the game. As for the attacking support, like I said, a bit more box to box, so he will be set to balanced. The interceptions is set to normal. You can almost shift it to aggressive if you would like, but you do have one of them doing so you don't need both of them working their asses off all the time. So with Howson, obviously he is a bit older as well. I've gone with the normal interceptions for him. And then he is going to be the deep lying playmaker. It is his job to try and get the ball off the goalkeeper or the back four and then progress it forward into the midfield, rotating play as much as possible. And in fact, both of your number sixes will be looking to try and rotate the ball, look for the better opportunities in those wider areas of the field, trying to supply those balls into those wider areas as much as possible. And then for the defensive positioning, now because you've got Hackney covering the central areas, you can allow for Howson to drift into those slightly wider areas of the field, trying to help in those particular areas, or potentially he can sometimes even look to just cover the center and help the likes of Hackney. I would say that if you are against a team that is going to attack you a lot, probably convert Howson into a central cover man with the likes of Hackney, creating that nice formidable shield in front of the back four, and then that allows you a bit more protection in the central areas. But for now, I've got him set to cover the wing. Moving on to your number 10, of course, Crooks. He is kind of going to be a secondary striker in that number 10 role. So for the defensive support, it is set to basic, so he can look to sometimes drop a bit deeper, other times looking to hang up the field and be a bit more of a linking chain in the offense going forward, whether it's a quick counter-attack, a quick turnover. You want him to be slightly higher up the field to try and support the actual number 9. As for the support on crosses, now I did note that he does get into the box quite a lot, making those back post runs, or potentially just making sure he is in the box if the striker is not. As for the positioning freedom, I've told him to stick to position. Now, I was playing around with it. I've played multiple games where he's been in the free roam role or the drift wide approach, but it doesn't get him as central as what I would like, personally. Especially if your striker does drop off or he does drift wide. You want at least the likes of Crooks to be in the box to try and take up that striker role. So I think the stick to position best suits Crooks. As for the interceptions, it is set to normal. And if you are chasing a game and you are trying to be a bit more tactical and pragmatic, I would suggest and advise you obviously go with a bit more of an aggressive approach for the interceptions. Out wide now to Riley McGree. He is set to come back on defense, always looking to try and help out the fullback, especially Engel, who does look to try and bomb on far forward. But because your fullback does tend to do this, you want McGree to somewhat drift inside, allowing a bit more space down the left-hand channel for your fullback. And in order to do that, and create overloads in certain areas of the midfield, you want him to be on free roam as well as come short. Now this will help him link up play a bit more with the central midfielders and your number 10, of course, almost taking up a secondary number 10 role for your left midfielder. And then for the interceptions, it's set to aggressive, and then the support on crosses is set to balance. So because you do have a decent amount of players getting into the box, more times than not, Riley McGree will be one of those players in the box waiting to attack a cutback or a cross and trying to obviously score the goal. As for your right-hand side, now slightly different to the left. Also, Isaiah Jones is set to come back on defense and then stay wide. So he will be creating a lot of the space and the pace down this right-hand channel. So stay wide and getting in behind Izzy Central, trying to exploit as much of the opposition as he can. And I've seen quite a few clips of him like just making those great runs in behind. His timing, his ability to know when to make the run, his teammates picking him out more times than not, whether it's a quick through ball through the bodies in the box and whatever into those wider channels, and him supplying the cutback or the cross. He's so damn good at it, and like he's very, very impressive. I wouldn't be surprised if potentially in a season or so we see him in the Premier League doing it for another team. Obviously if Middlesbrough do not get promoted. But none of that. His interceptions is set to aggressive, and then the supports on crosses, just like with the left-hand side, he is also going to be told to have a balanced approach. So sometimes making his way into the box, other times hanging on the edge of the area, looking to try and pick up those secondary balls, supply a secondary cross or a cutback, and trying to create a better opportunity if required. Now onto your striker, Latte Lath, I think that's how you pronounce it. So he is set to stay central. Now, again, I have seen, and against Chelsea, he was allowed to have a bit more of a freer role, allowing him to drift more into those wider channels if required, chasing down those loose balls or those balls fired into those wide areas of the field. But again, they were playing a slightly different system. So normally what happens is the number 9 gets told, stay central and attack as much as possible, whether it's getting in behind, trying to exploit the opposition, latching onto those balls that get fired in over the top, or potentially being a bit more of a target man, holding up play, being a bit more physical. Now, I do know that when... what is his name? Corbin, I think that's how you pronounce it. He is going to be a bit more of a natural 9, so he will be told to be a bit more of a target man, whereas with this man, he's got loads of pace to just run in behind and trying to run the opposition's defense ragged. So that's why for him, I told him to stay central and then get in behind. For the interceptions, you want to try and have him close down the opposition goalkeeper, forcing him into those long kicks or potentially hurrying up the opposition's back line. So the aggressive interceptions is set to be on for him. And then finally, the defensive support, he will be the out there ball, whether it's a quick goalkeeper restart or a quick restart from the back into front line, and you want your striker to try and work his magic. Now moving on to the offensive structure that you should look to take up, especially if you are feeling more confident or you are trying to chase a game, or maybe even trying to, add to your goal tally if you are comfortable in a game situation. Now, essentially, I don't know what this formation is called. I would just dub it as a 3-1-2-3-1. I don't know. You guys can let me know down below. But essentially, it is a very good offensive structure to try and keep your opposition pinned in their half. Now moving on to the formation, of course it's got a 5-1-2-1-1 in the corner there, but essentially it is 1 goalkeeper, 3 centre-backs, 1 DM, 2 central midfielders, 2 wider midfielders, 1 attacking midfielder, and then of course 1 striker. Now with the tactics going forward, of course, everything is more or less the same. You don't really need to change too much about it, except for the fact that the depth is now much higher. Of course, it was 75, now it's set to 90, and this does help with your wingers or your wider midfielders pin the opposition back in their own half and trying to exploit them as much as possible, making sure that they are very aggressive with trying to close them down, winning the ball back, and trying to be as assertive as possible to try and obviously turn the ball over and then transition quickly into the attack. But as you can see here, for the rest of the instructions at least, they are all set to the same. Now moving on to the instructions at the back, between the sticks, of course, your goalkeeper still sets the same set of instructions, more so required now than ever, of course, having a sweeper keeper with this very light defensive structure around him. You need him to be very proactive and reactive when having the ball at his feet, playing out from the back, making sure he's not making any silly judgmental errors, if that makes sense. Of course, if you turn the ball over close to your goal, you have very little defensive protection. So make sure that you aren't being wasteful with the ball at your goalkeeper's feet, and make sure that you are trying to find those correct passes. Moving on into your backline though, we've got the likes of Fry and McNair. Just like with before, they are set to the same set of instructions, but there is an odd change. Now, for the interceptions, I've set it to conservative. You do need at least these 2 guys, or at least 2 of your backline, to be a bit more conservative, a bit more structurally sound when they have the ball or when they are being driven at by the opposition. You need them to try and create a bit more structure to the backline when required. But now for the likes of Tommy Smith or Dick Steele, of course, you want this side, and because he is more of a right back that can play as a centre back, you want him to be able to get forward a bit more, creating a bit more of a inverted right back in certain moments. So for that, I've got him set to overlap for the attacking support, but the rest is set to the same. On into your midfield now, the likes of Housen, a very similar role to before. He's set to cut passing lanes, stay back while attacking, and then normal interceptions are set to be on form. Now, you can have him set to aggressive, but again, just like before, he is quite old, he's up there in age, and also, because he's the base of your midfield, you don't want him doing too much, especially with the others trying to win the ball back, be very aggressive and assertive on the game. You want him to be a bit more of the calmer head in the side, and look to try and rotate play, or just position himself correctly to try and break up as much of the opposition's offensive play as possible. As for the positioning freedom, just like with before, he is going to be the deep lying playmaker, having the sole role of collecting the ball off of the back 3, or maybe even the goalkeeper at times, and then obviously rotating it back into play. The defensive position is set to cover the wing, so he can look to drift every now and then. And of course, you do need him to help out in those wide areas, especially because your wider midfielders sometimes don't always come back, so you do need him to be able to pick up those wider runners when required. As for the likes of Hackney, now again, he is part of your double pivot in the balanced approach, right? So you kind of still want him to have a similar role, but slightly higher up the field. Of course, you're going to be more attacking, so you do want to have him a bit more involved in the offense, but again, have a bit more of a defensive awareness to him. So in order to replicate that, attacking support is set to stay back while attacking. The support on crosses is set to stay on the edge of the box. Now, you will always normally have around 3 to 4 players in the box. So even though we have set him to stay on the edge of the box for the cross, he sometimes will venture into the box and try and attack those aggressive cutbacks or crosses that will inevitably be fired into the box. Interceptions is set to aggressive, and then of course the defensive positioning, just like with before, is set to cover the center. So when out of possession, he will look to naturally try and shield the back 3/back 4 at times when required. And then for the positioning freedom on the offensive side of things, it is set to stick to position. As for the likes of Riley McGree, of course, shifting from the left hand side in, opening up a lot more space for your left back to try and attack down. And more or less, that's what we're trying to do here. So for the attacking support, it is set to a balanced approach, so he will look to be a bit more of a box-to-box player when required. The support on crosses is also set to balance, so again, just like with before, you do have around 3 or 4 players, and he will inevitably be one of them. Interceptions set to aggressive. You're trying to aggressively win that ball back, turn the ball over as much as possible, keep the ball in your possession with this offensive structure in place. And then the defensive positioning is set to cover the wing, so he is naturally a winger, or a wide midfield, I should say. So you want him to also try and help out the likes of Engel in those wide areas, just like the likes of Housen will try and do on the right-hand side, or even the left-hand side if push comes to shove. And then for the offensive positioning freedom, you want him to be able to drift into those wide areas, linking up a bit more effectively with your left back in certain moments, and then obviously making those interchanging runs and plays with your central midfielders. On to the likes of Crooks now, of course, playing as a secondary striker, but this time a slightly varying different role for him. So before, we had him more or less stick to position, whereas now with a more of an offensive system around him, you want your number 10/secondary striker to be able to pick up those little half spaces in and around the opposition's box, pulling players out of position, opening up a bit more space for the other midfielders or your striker, and more or less that's what I'm trying to replicate with this. So for the support on crosses, it is set to get into the box, creating that secondary striker type role where he is going to be attacking those balls, as much as the positioning freedom set to free roam. Like I say, you want him to try and, generate as much space around himself as for others as much as possible. So that's why I've gone with free roam for him. And this also allows him to kind of play off the shoulder of the natural number 9, and then maybe pick up the back post runs, or just off of the actual strike and maybe nick a goal or 2. As for the interceptions, just like with the other midfielders, it is also set to aggressive. Now moving on to your left midfielder. Look, both your wider midfielders have very similar roles. Of course, we're going to try and use Isaiah Jones's pace to get in behind a bit more, but otherwise they have very much the same roles. So for the left-hand side, the defensive support is set to come back on defense, trying to create that left-back roaming role higher up the field. And then the chance creation is set to stay wide. You want them to try and hug the touchlines, generate as much space between the lines as much as possible, and more or less stay wide does a very effective job. For the support runs, it is set to basic, so he can look to obviously make those lung busting runs in behind, or potentially come a bit more central, interchange positions with Riley McGree. When he does come short, Riley McGree would more or less look to try and drift wide into those wider areas, creating an overload, you could say. As for the interceptions, it is set to aggressive, and then finally the support on crosses is also set to a balanced approach. So sometimes getting into the box, other times not so much. Onto your right-hand side now, Isaiah Jones. His defensive support is set to basic, so naturally he will sometimes look to come back. You don't have anybody behind him. The likes of Smith will sometimes be slightly up the field, but for Jones, you don't really always require him to come back as much, because like I say, Smith is very adequate in defending those wider channeled areas. As for the chance creation, just like with the left-hand side, he is set to stay wide, but this time the major changes, you want him to consistently be making those runs in behind, exploiting the opposition on this right-hand side for your team, supplying those crosses, cutbacks for your forwards. As for the interceptions, just like with the left-hand side, it is set to aggressive, but this time you consistently want him to get into the box, make those attacking runs. He does, and he is allowed to shoot on sight when required. So more or less a more aggressive Isaiah Jones for the more offensive system. And then finally, moving on to your striker. Now for this, it does change depending on who you have. Like I said earlier with Corbin, He will be a bit more of a physical number 9, so he'll have a bit more holder play, whereas the likes of this man right here, Latte Lath, he will have a bit more of a balanced width, so having the ability to drift wider into those wider areas, link up play a bit more with the wider midfielders, or potentially stay a bit more central. Now for him, he is going to be told, make those runs in behind, try and exploit that opposition as much as possible, have the likes of Crooks hold the ball up a bit more, have the interchanging play with the secondary striker, and then play off of the final shoulder of the back line. As for the interceptions, just like with your other midfielders and attackers, it is set to aggressive, consistently looking to try and implement a counter-pressing system. And then finally, the defensive support, unlike with the balanced approach, you kind of do want him to sometimes drop a bit deeper, link up play, and then make those runs, spinning behind and trying to get the best out of him. And that will also be the same for your other more physical number 9, although the only real change would be this: it would be told to be a target man instead of a guessing behind type attacker. So yes, people, that is how I would replicate Michael Carrick's 4-2-3-1 system in the game FC24. Of course, I have also created these tactics kind of before. In FIFA 23, it wasn't as advanced as this. I'm trying to improve my video quality and the depth that I go into. So if you guys do enjoy this video, please, it is important to me and to the algorithm that you please hit that like button. And if you are new to the channel, like I said in the beginning of the video, please don't forget to subscribe. That would be absolutely fantastic. Of course, 2024, newer goals, newer things, bigger and better. I'm always looking to try and improve. You guys can let me know down below. I am getting to everybody's, when you guys do comment, please do this, please do that. I have a little list, I put them on the list, and then I try and work my way through it. So, I'll get there eventually, but please have some patience. But until the next time, my dudes, mad love, mad appreciation. I hope you have a damn great day. I'm out.